So, do you want me to introduce? Oh, sorry. Good morning, Joy.
Hi, it's Tech Pixies, and you're listening to the Sparkle and Thrive podcast. This is your host, Joy Foster, and I am delighted today to have a guest with us who is also a Tech Pixie. I interview a lot of the people I interview on the podcast are Tech Pixies. They graduated from our program, they've gone through our program, they're going through our program. They're learning how to use social media in order to get their message out into the world. And Maria Wybrow is no exception to that. She came through our boot camp training. She went through our social media management certification program. And one of the things that we teach on the boot camp is that in order to get your message out there, you've got to overcome your fear of getting the message out there. Like the message has to be more important than your fear of getting the message out there. And Maria has a really, really important message to get out there. So I am delighted that she's joining us today to talk about codependency. What is it? How do you know you have it? And what are the things you can do to combat it? So welcome, Maria. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you. Sorry about all the fuss earlier, but yeah. So, thank you for the opportunity. It does mean a lot, and yeah, I do have a message, and that message is, what I've suffered from all my adult life, but unknowingly, and that's codependency. So what is it? It's a behavioral issue, if I'm honest, where we have learned from a very young age to neglect ourselves, so not to be in tune with our feelings and our needs, because we were raised in an environment where it was safer for us to ignore them. And as a result, then we become adults and we're very focused on others, but to our detriment. So that's top line. We're focused externally, we look externally for validation. And this is where we get into lots of problems in relationships.
So in that sense, you're codependent on someone else for validating who you are.
Totally, totally.
And actually, I think a lot of women suffer from this.
Totally, totally. And
Not,
unknowingly, some women unknowingly spend their whole lives and then they come and see me midlife, 50, maybe late 40s, and I can already tell they'll be divorced at least once. They will more than likely have financial issues because they haven't focused on nurturing themselves. And if they've children, their children will have issues from their children will have issues very similar to what they created in their relationship that they grew up with. So they haven't got away from the problem. They've created more of it.
right. So let's talk about what causes codependency and what the signs are that you are codependent.
Yeah, I mean, basically growing up in a dysfunctional family. So years ago, it was associated with addiction only. And certainly where there's any form of addiction in a household, whether that's drug addiction, alcoholism, work addiction, porn, you name it, where there's addiction and there's no treatment for that addiction, you will be codependent if you grew up in that environment, but you possibly won't know that.
Why is that? Because my understanding of codependency, so I read the book Codependent No More, which was a real revelation in my understanding of what codependency is. And it's this from what I understood, it's the when someone has an addiction of some sort, or when there's this dysfunction of some sort, there's this control that they need to exert control, which is why, in many ways, they have the addiction in the first place, right? With the addictions come out of that need for control in many ways, or that desire for control. But then what? So when they become very controlling, then you are adapting to that environment. That's where the codependency is. So there,
Well,
is that right?
yes and no. The problem is if you grew up in an environment where your parent or parents have an addiction, they'll neglect you. They
Mm.
may think they're not neglecting you, but even if they're providing for you financially, emotionally, they're not available to nurture you or to teach you, for example, emotional regulation. So, this is the big difference with families in addiction versus other dysfunctional families, where I think, particularly in households with addiction, like I came from, you are not taught to emotionally regulate. So you're
Okay,
not.
this ability to regulate your emotions is
Yeah,
lost in a codependent household.
yeah, you don't learn it. So how that's expressed then is emotional outbursts or maybe stonewalling people because you're not in tune with how you're feeling. You're not in tune. The emotions are stored in the body. You're disconnected from the body because it was safer to do that growing up, not to feel emotions. So you're not feeling your feelings. So you're automatically drawn to other people and their feelings and their needs. But also, you don't know how to process what's going on for you in your life.
That stonewalling is such an interesting concept because um, I recently watched a video. IKEA did a video on plants and speaking to plants, and they took plants into schools, and they had a plant that they spoke positively to and a plant that they spoke negatively to, and the plant that they spoke positively to thrived, and the plant that they spoke negatively to really died. But interestingly enough, there was a rice experiment that was done, and in this experiment, they spoke positively to one pot of rice, they spoke negatively to another pot of rice, and then they ignored the third pot of rice, and that was the one that was the worst off, the one that was ignored. And actually, I do think I'm very fortunate. I did not grow up in a household where stonewalling was a thing. My parents always talked through things, even if it was heated. That was better that and that my mom would say that to me. They'd have an argument, and my mom would say, don't be worried about us having an argument because we're talking to each other.
Yeah,
It's worse if we're not talking to each other. And I get that now, and I appreciate that. I think what I've learned now is that there's that one things that I do appreciate is the ability to when my husband and I first got married, we just celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary. Um, when we
congratulations.
Thank you. When we
Yeah,
first got married, he we would have we I would not want to I would not let go of an argument. Like I would just fight, 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 or want to fight. And and he would just let's stop, just take a break, let's just take some space. And I just read in Brene Brown's book Atlas of the Heart, and also just all the training that you and I do as coaches, that actually this concept of high cognition low emotion is a way better place to have a conversation from. But the emotions get in the way, and it's really hard for us to do that, so we have to train ourselves to respond and not react. But again, these are things that if you grow up in a dysfunctional household, the responding versus reacting, it's hard to learn. And it's only been really with all the life coaching training that I've done that I agree that it's and very important to talk things through. I also think it's really important not to beat each other up either, and in words, or obviously physically, but in words. I think
yeah,
words can be as damaging, if not more damaging, than they're definitely more damaging than we think they are.
yeah.
um,
But
and
I think just the point that you made, you didn't grow up with addiction, but a dysfunctional family. I'm not suggesting this was you, but a dysfunctional family is families where there's um, emo, uh, communication is it doesn't happen, or you're punished for showing feeling or emotion, or you're not encouraged to, or emotional neglect. And then people wonder when they get to adulthood, particularly midlife, if you've done no work on yourself. Well, I didn't grow up in a dysfunctional family. There was no major issues. And we did kind of talk things through. But did you see a lot of your parents? Did they teach you how to self soothe? No, no, I never saw my parents. They were always working. So that's another form of neglect that we are now realizing with the study of trauma, for example, that these are actually traumatic incidences to grow up in, not what
mm,
we traditionally thought was, oh, well, I didn't grow up with addiction or there wasn't any violence. So I had it okay, but I'm still having difficulty in relating to me and to others. So it's understanding what
well, and
dysfunctional families really is.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, and it's, I think, I don't know many families that weren't to a certain degree dysfunctional. I remember being in the 1980s, being in elementary school in the US, and just a lot. There was divorce after divorce after divorce. Now, my parents were divorced from the time I was 4. So, and that was off the back of my biological mom had a brain injury, and she was a different person, and it's a very long story, but my parents got divorced and my dad remarried. And actually, I'm very grateful, because I think there was that would have been a really tricky household to be in. And I love both of my moms with all my heart. And I have 2 dads now too. So I love, both of my dads. I sadly I lost one of them, but I
Yeah.
got the blessing of having 4 parents. I mean, some people don't even, they get one or none, and I ended up with 4. But in that, obviously it was complicated, because I had a biological mother with a brain injury, and that's
Yeah.
complicated because she had a prefrontal cortex injury, which meant she couldn't regulate emotions in many ways. She was manic depressive originally with bipolar, and she's had
Yeah.
a lifelong struggle of medication regulation, and she's in a good place right now, which is just such a blessing. There's that sort of like let go and let God. That was one of those moments where you say, I can't fix this, I can't solve this, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
trust that everything's
Yeah.
gonna work out. And it has really worked out for her, in the sense that she's got a great place to live and she's being taken care of, and it all worked out. Any kind of disruption in your household can make it tricky to navigate those emotions. I had, from very, very early on, I had counseling and support, which I think was really, really important. But
Yeah.
I did have complication, and,
Yeah.
added layers of, complication. And I think when you look at kids who are, and also think about the world today, we talk about mental health. And we know what autism and Asperger's and ADHD and ADD are now, and because
Yeah.
we've discovered them, and
Yeah.
we've been able to find working on solutions for them and ways for people to live with all of these things. But in the 1980s, they weren't talking about any of this stuff. They didn't even,
Yeah.
God, just think about,
Totally.
I mean, if you were gay in the 1980s, it was, that was a disease. I mean, it was horrible. You think about how we've evolved,
Yeah.
just in 40, 50 years. So I think we have to, I think there's a large group of people who grew up in homes
Yeah.
that
That that
were,
that were dysfunctional. And here's the thing: there's no shame, because I don't know any parent who gets it 100% right 100% of the time.
yeah,
So it's not about bashing parenthood, even though I think today there should be a lot more information available to people who want to have children about parenting skills, for example. But, make no mistake, these are dysfunctional homes. We mightn't want to admit that. But I always say to clients, you'll know because your life isn't working, or some area, or more than maybe one area works. But it's always with relationships. Codependency is very intrinsically linked to our ability to relate to ourselves and then to others. So there'll always be an issue to a degree and I've seen it in my own journey, even in just the last 2 years. Like, I've just come back from holiday, and to my horror, one member of my family was actually staying in the same resort, and they haven't spoken to me in nearly a decade
and you didn't know
because
you were going to be in the same place.
no, no. I'll post it into the group, because my husband just said to me, "My God, Maria, you have come on leaps and bounds, even in the last 2 to 5 years." He said, "You handle that amazingly." Now, I wouldn't have had the skill to handle that 5 years ago, probably not even 3 years ago, but I'm
Yeah,
always willing to learn and be open to learning. And that's what I love about doing the work I do. I don't just learn stuff so I can teach clients. I am
yeah,
genuinely interested in mental health and
yeah,
helping people create more fulfilling, authentic relationships. Now, sometimes it's not going to happen with some people. But the great thing is, I feel, with the degree of healing I've done, is that I can still be amenable, and I could still have, well, I had the test. We still had a great holiday. And that wouldn't have happened 5 years
but
ago.
that's a really great point, because um and this is where it's down to you. and you've got the power within you to change how you look at things, your perspective. I oh my gosh, I'm thinking about two things right now as you're saying this, and I know people as they're listening to you, they're having their own reflections on their own life. But what I was navigating, while I had three parents, well, my dad, my original dad was still alive, my biological dad was still alive. I was navigating between what the three different parents and how they were going to react, right? And that's on me, right? I'm navigating between those, and sort of how do I be the best version of myself with each one of them, which means I'm never myself, right? That's the challenge. You're never truly yourself.
Mhm.
You're trying to be who you think that each one of these people wants you to be. And that was that, as a child, you want everyone to love you and you want to be loved. And so you just do that. And what it means later on in life is that you're still, doing that. And then, then you add in a partner, and then you add in a new bonus
Yeah,
dad. And then you've got this,
yeah,
you've got a new dynamic where again, and then you're changing yourself. And I think this work that I've done has really helped me to go, who am I?
yeah,
Who
yeah,
am I? And who
yeah,
do I want to be? And really be able to, know who I am and what I want to do with my life. It's my life. I only get
mm,
one of
yeah,
them. And,
yeah,
I do have a family, and
yeah,
and that was one of my dreams, was to have a family. But
yeah,
how do I still be who I am in the context of my family and not mold and shape myself to everybody else?
yeah,
But that's a really interesting point about a holiday, because I had one situation where I'd gone on holiday, not holiday, I'd gone on a work holiday, but it was a really fantastic week. But I hadn't necessarily um, done things the way that I maybe should have, in some ways, with a particular person in my life, and we got in a huge argument over the phone right before I got on the plane. And I was that idiot in the airport that was like, really? We're having this conversation right before I get on a plane. You never know what's going to happen on the plane. And I was stewed on it for 12 hours. And I was on the bus, and I'm driving home on the bus, and I'm thinking, I let that one conversation ruin an entire week, which was a fantastic week.
yeah,
And that was the moment where I decided for myself that I was in control of what I thought about things, and I decided I was going to remember that week as being fabulous, and that I was going to, be grateful that I had a wonderful week, and um, and then just really wish healing and love and peace on that conversation so that we could move forward. And that was a turning point in that relationship, because for me, that was when I started, I was learning in the Dream Builder program, I was learning the practice of forgiveness. So, and I learned the Dalai Lama loving kindness meditation. So I have a shortened version of it, but it's great
yeah,
for anything where your feelings are adjusting to someone else. It's a really great thing because you want to separate yourself from that person. But it's I wish you peace, I wish you joy, I wish you happiness, I wish myself peace, I wish myself joy, I wish myself happiness, I wish us both joy, I wish us both peace, I wish us both happiness. And when you really can separate the spiritual side of the person from the physical side of the person, and recognize that you really want what's best for them and you
oh,
want
yeah,
what's best for you, you can
yeah,
sort of meet in that place. And that's where healing happens. So for me, that was a turning point in a tricky relationship. Well, it wasn't a tricky relationship, but all the time, but there were pockets of trickiness,
yeah,
and that seemed to change things. But yeah, codependency is an interesting thing, because I think,
mm,
like we said earlier, people are coming from, they have lots of different experiences with it without even realizing it.
yeah.
So give me your, like, the top 5 signs that you're codependent.
Okay, indecisiveness. I'd say I was plagued with that dreadfully. And then when you make a decision, you berate yourself because you feel it wasn't a good enough one. Unable to identify your feelings, your needs, confusing needs and wants, for example, valuing the approval of others more than your own approval of yourself, compromising your values and integrity. This is where the people pleasing comes in for the sake of relationships, even if those relationships are unhealthy for you, or staying in an unhealthy, toxic, narcissistic relationship, for example, knowing that you should leave, but being quite just not able to make that break. I see that all the time. Harboring feelings of resentment because you're doing and giving and you don't feel you're getting the accolade or the recognition for that, and overdoing and
So codependents have a real need for praise.
well, it's what happens is codependents are trying to fix and be very attuned to other people's feelings and needs, not their own. So they'll jump in and fix. Like I used to always do relationships years and years ago where I was the fixer. So someone would have major issues in their life, not really be suitable to be in a relationship with, and then spend the next 2 years of my life fixing them.
Hmm.
And then the relationship would end.
Yeah.
And I did that with my first marriage. Ran after him, left my country, did everything. He had the education first, and then he went on off. So I gave up everything, sacrificed my needs and everything, my goals for that relationship. And then what happened was he left.
Mm.
So
Well,
that,
that's a common story we hear from a lot
yeah,
of women.
yeah. So compromising
I'm used
your,
to, I mean, I've heard that story a few times.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And having low self esteem, deep down feelings of not being good enough, low
But
self esteem.
but that's the thing. In that relationship, they've given up everything and they haven't kept a monocle of themselves. And this is the key, is like you really got to know who you are so that
Yeah, yeah,
you create your own life. Even within a life together, you create your own
yeah,
life.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
like, I
yeah.
think that's key number one. Who am I and what would I love, and how do I pursue this, so
But
that you are an
yeah,
individual.
you're going to find it very difficult to do that, Joy, though,
Yeah.
even though we can cognitively understand those questions, unless we get in tune with how we are feeling.
Yeah.
And that means we've got to get in touch with the emotions which are stored in our body. So we need to connect with the body more, because it's from our feelings that we can identify our needs. So I can tell you, next time around, 10 years later, when I started dating again, a very different person was dating. And I was very clear on my needs and how I was feeling. So when I met the man I'm now married to, I knew instinctively from the first, probably we'd had 3 or 4 emails, and then we met just for a cup of tea. And I knew after that first meeting he was completely different to
Mm,
anything I'd ever dated, and in a good way.
yeah.
And he, it was great that he wasn't like the others. That's how he got my attention. But he was very interested in me. And it wasn't about him bragging, it was about learning, to find out more about me. And he did share a little bit about him initially, but I knew as soon as I met him. And, the rest, as they say, is history. But uh,
But that's important, because between your first marriage and your second marriage, because I know there's a lot of people listening to this who have had second marriages, and that was interesting. I came from a home. All four of my parents, who I love very, very dearly, all four of my parents were divorced before they like. So my dad got divorced. My biological mom, obviously, that was interesting, because she was married before my dad, and they were divorced, and then she and my dad divorced, and a lot of that had to do with the accident, but a lot of it had to do with what was going on, as a result of the brain injury. But then my bonus mom, who married my dad and raised me, she had been divorced, and my bonus dad, who is now had been with my mom for 17 years now, he was married and divorced. So I it's very interesting to be in a family where all
mm,
four of my parents were
yeah,
all gone through that. That's a very, and you, so there's a part of you that thinks, am I going to make this, am I going to survive this? And my dad and I mean, to be fair, my dad and my bonus mom, that was my biological dad and my bonus mom. I have to separate them all because it gets confusing. um but my and I don't like using first names because it's more fun to actually call them, dad, mom. But my biological dad and my bonus mom, they were married until he died, and so I did have an example in my life of stability and of two
cool.
people that worked things through. in the way that they worked it through. So, I do think it's interesting. We all come from different backgrounds. Some people, my husband had the opposite. His parents were married for 50 years, start to finish. But yet there were some challenges there too. I mean, I just don't think you can't get through marriage without a challenge, right? I think.
Exactly. Exactly.
What was
And
the difference between the first, like, 'cause I'm acknowledging that there's going to be people listening to this who are on
mm,
they've had one or two divorces already under their belt.
yeah,
Uh, and so how did you get from the first divorce to the second marriage? What were the things that you did, like three
yeah.
things that were really key for you?
Well, I think addressed my past. So I went to therapy. I didn't know that I needed to address my childhood, but I went to therapy because I didn't really understand why I ended up divorced, because he left me. So
Mm,
I went to therapy, and then I eventually, through that process, addressed my childhood. But then I started to focus more on like what you're saying, who am I? What
mm,
do I like? How am I feeling? What do I need? How do I want my life to be? So the focus came off looking for a man, running after men, looking for a relationship. And this evolved, and the focus came back onto me. And it's
mm,
like what you said, it's only one life, So by the time I was in my mid 30s, I knew I didn't want to go back to Ireland. I wanted to stay in the UK. So I wanted to settle here. So that wasn't decided for me. I made that decision, and I wanted to travel. And I didn't necessarily want to have kids, but I might be open to it. But I wanted to be with somebody who wouldn't put me under pressure. So I wanted somebody flexible like me who wanted to travel, but they had addressed their issues, or they didn't come from as dysfunctional background as I did.
okay, so the first thing you did was get counseling.
Get help.
Get
Yeah.
help. Get help and support. Like, it's
Yeah.
gonna be very
Very
hard to make
help.
this transition
Yeah.
without help and support. So you got help
Yeah.
and support.
Yeah.
Second thing you did was you focused on who you were.
Yeah.
And once you'd established who you were, then you were able to say, "Okay, now what am I looking for?"
Yeah. I didn't date. I mean, I might have dated a bit going through that process, but they never worked. And it wasn't until I came out of that process and then thought, well, what does Maria want? Well, I knew I wanted to stay in the UK. I probably did want to get married, but I wanted a partnership. I didn't want to be an unpaid housemaid, an unpaid mom. Not that there's anything wrong with those things if you're happy doing them, but I didn't want them. I
But a
want,
lot of I mean, I just wanna say a lot of women unconsciously, they do it without realizing what they're
yes,
doing. So,
yeah.
a
So, yeah,
lot of women, they recognize I'm a mother, but they don't recognize, I'm an unpaid mother because we don't have
well,
it in society that recognize paying
yeah,
mothers.
yeah. No, but I'm just saying, sorry, I didn't mean to sound derogatory. I'm just saying
Yeah.
is if you get divorced even once or twice, you have a clean slate. You can address the past, and then okay, you can't send your kids back. But what I'm saying is I see a lot of women having children again that didn't want to
Oh, right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was to please somebody
Somebody
else.
else.
So
Yeah.
just focus on what you want. Some women may want to do whatever they want to do, but be clear on what you would like, what you need before you involve yourself in other
Yeah.
relationships.
No, I think that's really important. And it's really interesting because, I've sort of said, as I've said to my husband a few times, well, he knows this, and the kids have said this too. There was a point when we got married where I was like, I'm so glad no one else asked me, because I would have said yes for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
I was just so grateful that no one asked. And that's another thing where I was like, thank God for God, just the question never came up. They never asked. And, because I just, I would have, I don't know how it would have gone, but I do know what I ended up with was exactly what I wanted. And,
yeah,
I, you know,
which is lovely.
yes, it is. Trust me, I am so grateful. And and the thing is hopefully the people that I was with before him are happy in their own lives, and it's better for them. But I think it is interesting because you don't. I knew what I wanted, but if it's our story is that we actually got together when I was 21 and he was 30. And I was absolutely madly in love with him, and I wanted to marry him right then and there. And of course, I was way too young. And now that I know, a lot about the brain. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't develop until as a woman until you're 25, and as a man until you're 28. So he was 30 years old, and I was 21, and I was nowhere near having a developed prefrontal cortex. And obviously his had just finished. But we dated for about 10 months, and we broke up. We didn't see each other, speak to each other for 7 years. So fast forward 7 years, and we're both in Beijing, we're both in China. And actually, I was so grateful that I had those 7 years to make
Yeah.
all the mistakes and do all this dumb stuff and learn, date the people that I really didn't want to marry in the end. And when we did get together, we went out for beer and sort of to let the past be the past. And 10 days later, we ended up engaged. So, that whole life
Mm.
shifted and changed. But I did know what I wanted, and I was, and that was important to me. And by the time I found him again, by
Yeah.
the time we came back together, I'd had 7 years of self discovery.
Yeah. And
And
I think that's what what I want to share in your podcast for anyone listening out there who is divorced once or twice. The difference between my first marriage was I ran after him. I left my country. I left my education. I ran. Second time around, I was stood still. This is where I want to be. This is who I am. Are you kind of in line with what I'm looking for? A
mm,
very, very different scenario. And here's the thing, he was looking for exactly somebody like me,
mm,
believe it or not.
yeah.
So, yeah, but that was focus more on Maria, what my needs are, what do I want, instead of running after other people to feel okay.
And I think that's a luxury in many ways that our generation has that previous female generations did not have. I think we have to really acknowledge that we live in a generation where we can be financially independent. We can open up a bank account.
Yeah,
We can vote. We can drive.
yeah.
There are basic rights. I mean, I was just listening to a news report last night about women in Afghanistan, and they were talking about the very high rate of suicide in young girls in Afghanistan, and the Afghanistan government, the Afghani government, is not tracking it because they don't track it. It's like it's a very shameful thing in that society, so they don't track it. They don't have the numbers. But what they're finding is, and when you listen to these interviews, they were heartbreaking. I mean, my husband had gone up to bed, and I said, I just want to watch this interview, and it was really sad to watch. But they were saying, I am sitting at home. I am not allowed to study. I have no hope, no future. Like life, that's literally where they're coming from. And it was so sad to watch that. So I do think we have to acknowledge we are so lucky. When my mom graduated from, well, both my moms, when they graduated from university, they had two choices. They could be a nurse or they could be a teacher, and they both became teachers. But that was it. That was your choice. You couldn't be a CEO of a company. You couldn't
Yeah.
launch a coaching business. Coaching didn't even exist. You
Yeah.
couldn't. There really were not options. I mean, even in if you, there just weren't options. You just
Yeah.
didn't have options.
Totally.
So
Totally.
we're in this age. I remember I interviewed Dame Stephanie Shirley. She built a $3 billion business from her kitchen table, doing software programming in the
I
1960s.
remember.
And
Yeah.
yeah, she'd escaped the Nazis as a child, and she had a child who was severely autistic who later died.
Mm.
But she said to me, when I started my business, my husband had to open the bank account. I could not open the bank account without him.
Mm.
And she said, and also the workplace was dangerous.
Yeah.
There was a very high likelihood you were going to get, you know, not just sexually harassed, but
Yeah. Yeah.
really.
No, for sure. I mean, no, things have moved on, but I still feel that, I mean, there's lots of demand. There's lots of demand out there. I mean, when I speak on Clubhouse, the rooms are full about codependency or anything to do with relationships. And I know it was a big, big pain point for me, as a woman in my 30s. Am I ever going to meet somebody who is not an addict, who is emotionally healthy, and who has a reasonable job? And there, I wasn't focused on his job and his career, even though those things are important. I was more focused on, how is he emotionally? Is he healthy? Is he available? But also, has he dealt with any stuff from his past? Or is it still lingering? because when we hook up with somebody, you're aligning yourself with all their behaviors, good and bad, and you're aligning themselves with their childhood trauma if they've had any, and if they haven't addressed it, you're joining, you're becoming a union. So the more healed you are, the better. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have done a lot of work together on our relationship also, so it's still possible to heal whilst being in a relationship.
Yeah.
But if you're single, I would always recommend doing the work first
Yeah.
before we jump into the dating arena, because
Yes.
it will make it easier for you,
Yeah.
and you will be more aware of you and what you want and need. So when people come to you, you're more discerning about, because you're in tune with what's going on for you, who's going to align better. So I hear it all the time on social media. Oh, they weren't a narcissist when I met them. And I say, actually, I beg to differ.
Yeah.
You would have got the sign. The contract is made in the first meeting. It's unconscious. And the
Yeah.
signs were there. You just didn't see them or feel
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. That is so true. I think that's so true. You just don't see you don't, when you, and love, blinds a lot of that,
Yeah.
there's, and it was, I was, we went punting the other day. It was so beautiful. I live in Oxford. And so
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
out punting, and a friend of my son and his best friend, and then the dad of the son and I the four of us went, and we were chatting, and he's been married 30 years. And obviously we've been married 14. Um, we were talking about how, it is, it's a long time. It's a long commitment, right? And,
Yeah.
and he's 30 years and I'm 14 years. I mean, he's double what I've done. And, but what we were saying was that you change, you change, even though you're saying, yes, I know who I am, even though you know who you are at 30 might change when you're 40, might change when you're 50. And it's also being in a relationship that adapts to sort of who you are and who you want to become, and
Yeah.
supports that. And how do you do that, and how do you do that together?
Yeah.
That that's
Yeah.
also a tricky thing. Is
But
as
if,
it change later.
yeah, no, and for sure. But if, like, for example, I always look at my feelings. I get out the feelings wheel once a week and I go through feelings and emotions in me once a week. And I'm lucky because I'm married to somebody who instinctively does it.
Yeah,
I've had to learn to do this. So I'm more clear of my needs and feelings. So when we come to the table as a couple, I just have always had that support, Joy. He is so together. He has been able to support me through this transition from working full time in corporate to the online space. And he was always together, but I always knew that about him. But of course, there is room within the relationship and we have definitely changed and evolved. But the more you're individually addressing your own needs and feelings, or at least being clear on what you're feeling and then able to communicate why, it allows that space for people to evolve and grow.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I just think this is such a powerful conversation, especially for a lot of the women that are in our community, because a lot of them will, maybe for the first time, understand what's been happening in their lives because of this conversation. So now we're going to wrap it up in a minute, and I
Yeah.
want to make sure people can find you. But before we do that, when you came to Tech Pixies, it took you a while to find the message and to have the courage to start talking about it. So I want to take a minute for people who are listening to this and they're in our social media program, and or they might be in our Dream Builder program, and they've got this message they need to get out into the world, but it feels scary to talk about, because the backlash that they might get from their family, or or whatever, the worried about what other people might think, or you went from corporate into this online space, etc. So talk to me about what it was like for you to find your message and get your message out there. You found a home on Clubhouse. That's where you're at, which is a listening only social media. Really, it's like on live radio. You can create your own shows and have your own guests and things. It's live audio. But tell me about what that was like for you, because you took you a while to find your voice, and then when you
Mm,
found it,
mm.
it sort of took off. But it
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm on Clubhouse and Instagram. I did work with somebody 2 years ago for about 9 months because I thought I have trained as a coach. I know I'm good at speaking. What the hell am I meant to? What am I meant to do? And then after 7 months of working with this coach, she just said to me, "I think it's obvious what you should do." And I went, "Really? Share," because I'm aghast. And here's the thing, I've spent my whole adulthood, Joy, overcoming a really toxic, dysfunctional childhood that was covered up to look good on the outside. So it was harder to dig away at it. And it cost me a career because that was always my bugbear in therapy, that it took so long in therapy to uncover and deal and blah, blah, blah. And I'm still working on myself, that the time to develop a career in corporate went. Plus, I had so many issues, it wasn't going to happen anyway. But then I came on social media, and mental health's big business on social media. And I thought, hold on a minute, I adore mental health. I want to educate people about dysfunctional families, families with addiction, families maybe where there's no addiction, but you didn't get what you needed, and then how that translates into adulthood, and then what you can do to overcome. So she said, why aren't you selling your story? Your story is you came from, I should have ended up achieving nothing in life. Sexual abuse in childhood, covered up, addiction,
Mhm.
untreated. The whole household is still in denial today. I came to the UK with nothing. I got divorced, and only that I had a good lawyer. She ensured that I kept something. But I had a vision. I had a vision. I deserve a decent relationship. I have no clue how I'm going to get one, but I committed to that. And then when the pandemic happened, I thought, I have never really wanted to do the jobs I did in corporate. I want to be out there educating men, but particularly women, about codependency and what you can do to overcome. Because I've done it. I have the healthy relationship that proves that. And that's literally what my passion is to educate women. I mean, men as well. I have men clients, but I do have a burning desire to wake women up to the fact they are so powerful, they're the life-giving force, and that they don't have to play these societal roles unless they really want to. They can assert themselves. What do you need? What are you feeling? How do you want your life to be? And then I'm literally just selling my recovery journey, Joy, because, I've just come back from a 2 week holiday. We had a great time, but there was a big test on that holiday, and we still had a great time.
Yeah.
I know that wouldn't have happened 10
Well, and
years
that's that concept of we live in a spiral universe, and even our very DNA is spiral. And as we revisit we revisit the same situations with a higher level of awareness, we're able to deal with them completely differently. And that is such a gift and it's such
Yeah,
a beautiful thing.
yeah.
And was how did the social media
So
management certification program help you establish
yeah,
that
it's.
voice?
I would say your course is mandatory, and I say this to everyone I meet who wants to go online. Right? You can't do it without learning social media. So even though, for example, I mightn't have wanted to be a social media manager, I needed to be in that community. So learning about the different platforms like Twitter, which I think I will go on to because I love Twitter, or Instagram, love Instagram. I had zero clue before your course. I thought Instagram was social media. I mean, I had zero clue. Facebook. I mean, learning all the different platforms, knowing where your clients are is key. So I know my clients are on Facebook. I know some of them are on Instagram, and I know some of them are in Clubhouse. Then you need to be in that community though, because you will need support to develop your business.
Mhm.
So I can bob into Tech Pixies, or sometimes I don't need to go in because somebody asks the question that I needed the answer for, and I go, hey, or I could go in and I know that I'll probably find somebody who'll give me the answer or point me in the right direction.
Yeah.
But you can't launch an online business, in my opinion, without knowing social media.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible.
Well, I love that. So I love once you really got in touch with who you were and got your marriage established in the way that you wanted it to, then it was like, okay, now this career's not working for me. Let's look at what I really want to do. And I love that someone else helped you to also see that too. And I think there's a message of support and coaching and guidance here that's really important. And I think we all need it. And if you're breathing, you need coaching and support, in my opinion,
Mm, totally,
because
totally.
it's what helps you to become the best version of yourself. So if someone has codependency issues and maybe in listening to this has identified that they might be codependent and they need some support in codependent recovery, how can they find you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, mariawybrow.com. You can book a discovery call with me on my website. There's loads of free information about codependency, what it is, what you can do about it. I have 2 free ebooks. Instagram at Maria Wybrow, and Clubhouse. I'm in there at least once a week. Women in Business or Human Behavior, those 2 clubs, and I talk about codependency and lots of related issues around relationships and dysfunctional families.
Well, I think we ought to do another podcast where you explain the ins and outs of Clubhouse, because I know there'll be people that are interested in that. So it's Maria Wybrow, MariaWybrow, just in case that is a tricky spelling for some of you. Maria, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you, Joy. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was a fantastic conversation. One that we've had twice because the first recording didn't work out and I had to re-record it. And there were some great golden nuggets in there. I think the most important thing is that we live in an age, right? It's now 2023 as I'm recording this, but we live in an age where many of us who might be in our 40s, 50s, and 60s, even 70s and 80s, grew up in households where mental health was not discussed. And now, of course, I believe in brain health, which leads to better mental health. So a healthy brain, healthy life. But the most important thing to understand here is that there's a huge group of women and men, but particularly women, because that's who I've worked with very closely for the last 10 years almost, that grew up in a time period where we were transitioning out of dogma and into a much more religious dogma and into a much more accepting world, which in that accepting world, we started to understand and explore all of these concepts, codependency being one of them. And talking about feelings and being able to be in control of your emotions from a standpoint of responding and not reacting, all of these things, the importance of forgiveness so that you can separate yourself from the other person and you can live your life without being attached to that hurt and pain. All of these things are so important for our healthy functionality in this world, our ability to function and live a long, prosperous, beautiful, wonderful life, which is what I want every single one of you to do. So if you're interested in that and you're interested in finding out more about how Tech Pixies can support you either with life coaching or business coaching or social media coaching, you can go to techpixies.com and find out more. You can also email us at support@techpixies.com. You can book a discovery call with me. I would love to talk to you about where you're at in your life and how we can support you to get to where you want to be. And Maria is a perfect example of someone who grew up with all the disadvantages and yet was able to find her way to her voice, get her voice out there, and is now helping others to recover so that they can live their best life. So I'm so grateful that we have incredible women like Maria in our community. And trust me, we have a lot of them. We have over 850, at the time of this recording, we have over 850 women in our community. They are beautiful inside and out. And they all have incredible skills and talents, and that's just one of them. If you'd like to know more about our community, just go listen to the podcast, the Sparkle and Thrive podcast. There's hundreds of episodes where we're getting closer and closer to our 200th episode. And many, many of the interviews are with women in our own community who are just absolutely exceptional. And I'm so grateful to know each and every one of them. So if you're listening to this and you're not yet a Tech Pixie, I would encourage you to figure out how to connect with us. And we'd love to support you on your journey. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.